The winds up there are compatible with what NASA had programmed in the computers. And the shuttle itself is all ready to go. The crew's aboard, strapped in and ready to go. This morning, thousands of people lined up all up and down the Florida Space Coast, hoping to see them light up the shuttle and send it up for the first time in 32 months. Earlier today, the shuttle crew obliged by giving something else not seen here in a long, long time, the NASA astronaut wave. And then the other familiar sight, watching the shuttle crew suit up and get into the shuttle. The shuttle these brave astronauts hope to fly this morning may not look much different than it used to look, but it is different. There have been hundreds of design changes in the shuttle since Challenger exploded, and a change in attitude that can be summed up in two words: safety first. On both scores, new design and new thinking, most of the major changes involve the solid rocket booster that ruptured and destroyed Challenger. A redesigned booster, tested over and over again, is set to launch Discovery. But that's not all. Better, stronger brakes for landing. The shuttle's main engines have been overhauled. The wings are strengthened. And for the first time, an in-flight escape system. The hatch can be blown. The astronauts can slide off a 12-foot pole, clear the shuttle, and parachute down. It only works when the shuttle is gliding. No use should there be a Challenger-type accident during liftoff. The new shuttle program may be improved, the new watchwords may be safety first, but it isn't risk-free. Well, we were just listening to the latest from NASA. Now, here is the situation. They've been hoping to launch, and a go for launch at 11:30 Eastern Time. But there's been a new development. With us now, Jeff Hoffman, who has flown aboard the space shuttle. Astronaut Jeff Hoffman, still in the program. Jeff, what is the latest, and does it look like we're going to go at 11:30, or maybe a little later than that?
Well, I'll tell you, I feel for these guys. I had to hold on the pad at T-minus 9 minutes while we waited for weather, and we finally went. I like to feel in my guts that they're going to go. Right now, Bob Crippen is polling the mission management team. He's trying to get goes from everybody. So far, everybody has given a go. A minor glitch possibly with an oxygen sensor. I'm listening now. It sounds like they're sorting that out. Things are looking good.
You mentioned Bob Crippen. This is one of the changes that has been made. Crippen, an astronaut, has been assigned the job. It doesn't go unless he says thumbs up.
That's correct. He will poll his team. He will then give the launch director the go for launch. Then it's over to the launch team. But Bob Crippen's got to give the go before we go.
Now, for those of you who may have just joined us or may be confused about what's happening here, everything this morning has gone beautifully except those winds way up there, 25,000 feet or above, which were simply too low and in the wrong direction to be compatible with what NASA had put into the computers. They've worked the situation down to a T-minus 9 minutes. That would be 9 minutes to liftoff, and they've been holding there. They hope to start counting again at 11:21 Eastern Time. That would be about 6 minutes from now. And if they are able to do that, then we might have a launch as early as 11:30. Watching with thousands of other people outside the Cape is correspondent Peter Van Sant. Peter, you've been waiting and watching out there for a long time, and I gather that the level of anticipation, tension, and hope is about as high out there as it is here.
Oh, it's tremendous. Tremendous anticipation and excitement, and some nervousness. Even veteran shuttle watchers are a bit nervous about this one. They feel as though we're launching into the great unknown. But right now, thousands of people are out here baking in the sun, waiting for Discovery to make its move. 3-year-old Alexander Summer is among the thousands waiting for Discovery to fly.
Well, it's going to be over there. But I thought it's going to be over there.
Is it going to blast off? The Discovery launch has turned into a waiting game for the thousands of people who have traveled here from all over the country to witness history.
As far as I'm concerned personally, it's pride, and I wish to see the national esteem reestablished.
This is really what I've been looking forward to for the past years, and then finally getting it together is really awesome.
For some, today's possible launch represents a chance to restore some lost confidence in the U.S. space program.
Well, it's been like a teeter-totter. I've gone from one end of the spectrum in that thinking NASA could ever do any wrong to the other end of the teeter-totter and thinking that they could never do any right.
Others will be watching Discovery ride the flame into space with apprehension. The memories of the Challenger disaster still fresh in their minds.
Up and away, sure nervous. But we need it, and They're trained for it. And they got to go for it.
Everyone here is hoping they're going to go for it soon. And as I mentioned, there's going to be some white knuckles out here. A lot of fingers crossed as Discovery climbs into space. Everyone is hoping for the best, and we shall see. We are waiting.
Thanks, Peter. And waiting is exactly what we're doing. We're at T-9 and holding. They hope to start the countdown about, 5 minutes from now. And if they're able to start the countdown, once that clock starts, then they would hope to get a liftoff, to get a launch about 10 minutes after that, which would be at 11:30. So if we start the clock down at 11:21 Eastern Time, as they hope, we'd have the launch at 11:30. Joining me here at our CBS News headquarters at the Kennedy Space Center, Bruce Hall, our veteran space watcher. Bruce, you can feel the anticipation rising here. When NASA said, listen, we have a go for launch, which we got, about 16, 17 minutes ago, there was a jump in anticipation. One can only imagine what that crew must be thinking. Is it a different kind of crew for this launch?
Dan, it certainly is a different kind of crew, because this time, for the first time, we have an all-veteran shuttle crew. 5 astronauts who've logged more than 1,000 hours in space, 4 military professionals, and an astronomer. The commander is 47-year-old Frederick Houck, known as Rick, a third-generation Navy man. He has been on 2 shuttle flights, including the first satellite space salvage mission. 42-year-old Richard Dick Covey is the pilot, an Air Force test pilot. He has logged more than 4,000 hours. He piloted Discovery on a virtual error-free flight in August 1985. And it was his voice everyone heard, giving the final instructions to Challenger crew, go at throttle up. John Mike Lounge, 42-year-old astrophysicist. He is in charge of deploying a communications satellite aboard Discovery. A former Navy aviator, he now flies once a week with the Texas Air National Guard. 38-year-old Marine Lieutenant Colonel Dave Hilmers is a computer genius. He flew on the first flight of Atlantis and will be the flight engineer on this trip. George Pinky Nelson, the youngest member of the crew, the only one who has walked in space. He has a doctorate in astronomy and plays in an all-astronaut rock and roll band called Max Q. So it's a different crew. We've never had one with all shuttle veterans before. No rookies this time.
Well, Bruce, we're keeping a close eye on things here. We all have our fingers crossed, knocking on wood, saying a little prayer that they can get it up today. While we wait and see whether they start the clock running again, let's take a break. We'll be right back.
Some conditions at the emergency landing sites around the world, but most of that now does appear to have been solved. And there on Launch Pad 39B, the orbiter is in place. All 5 astronauts are in their pressure suits and locked into place, and they're talking with the control room here. It's 32 months after the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, of course, and this is an attempt to soften the memory of that. After all, after our long and romantic involvement with space, for most of us, that great tragedy was like a sudden death in our own family. And so today, well, the payload is a relay and tracking satellite to be used by other space systems. The real mission here is to, as I say, soften the memory of Challenger and to reignite the commitment of the American people to the U.S. space program. Everyone here has a lot riding on the successful launch today of the Space Shuttle Discovery. The final go, no-go decision will be made by Navy Captain Robert Crippen, who is one of the most experienced of the astronauts. There will be no confusion on communications this time. He'll go through the various checkpoints, about 25 in all, and he'll say go or no go from that room. Standing by as well as my colleague, NBC science correspondent Robert Bazell. Robert, it does look better for the weather at this hour, I gather.
That's right, Tom. There's no problem with the weather here at the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral. There's some problem with some of the transatlantic sites. That's where they would land in an emergency, but there's one in Spain that's fine. There's no problem at Edwards Air Force Base. The early problem was with upper-level winds, which, as you mentioned, were too light, which might have been a problem because the computer software on board the Discovery couldn't handle them. They've done an analysis of the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Apparently, they think they can handle the current situation. There was no indication that they really got within acceptable limits, but they think they can handle it now, and it looks like a go for launch in terms of weather.
All right, thank you very much, Bob Bazell. Even with these holds that we've been experiencing all morning long, NASA has been clicking right through its predetermined schedule. It got the astronauts up on time this morning, even though those winds were unacceptable at an early hour. They had breakfast, and then they got into their pressure suits, and then that familiar picture that we have not seen for such a long time, in fact, 32 months, These are the 5 astronauts from Discovery who are all veterans. They represent the very best of breed in the American space program. NASA wants nothing to go wrong this time. They're led by Navy Captain Rick Houck, pilot from the Air Force, mission specialist. All of them have been in space before in the shuttle program. No civilians on this flight. Whether there ever will be again, that's a question that remains, of course. We want to tell you that they are in the orbiter right now. They're going through their checklist, and here going through our checklist with us this morning, 2 veterans of the American space program, one of whom has been with us before, Dr. Joe Kerwin, of course, who is no longer with NASA, but he is now with Lockheed, and Al O'Hara, who had to make these decisions as a launch director once before. Mr. O'Hara, let's begin with you if we can this morning. There are a lot of constraints on the conditions for launch today, and they're not going to let anything go more.
They are waiting on board for weather as well. They have just recently been given the weather overseas at the alternate locations, one in Spain and one in Morocco, where they could land if they were obliged to abort this flight before they actually got into orbit. They have been told that at Marón in Spain, the weather is fine, but that Ben Gurir in Morocco, which is the backup site, the winds are a bit too strong at the moment. Let's listen.
And current weather conditions, we got some scattered low stuff below 5,000. We got some showers offshore that are topping out around 14,000. None of that.
Rick just wants an update for Kennedy weather for RTLS.
I see. That's Rick Houck, who's the commander on board. Remember, they are Rick Houck, Dick Covey, David Hilmers, Mike Lowndes, Pinky Nelson, the only civilian on board. He's the astronomer. The commander is Rick Houck. The pilot is Dick Covey. All military men with a heavy preponderance, I might as well get it out of the way now, of Navy. Gene Cernan.
I wondered when you'd say that. We're really beginning to run the show, aren't we? We decided to take an Air Force guy with us on this trip.
Your Navy, Dick Richards, your Navy? There's a lot of Navy involved.
Well, Dick Truly, Bob Crippen, I think we go way back from Alan Shepard and work our way up. We're getting our plug in, aren't we?
Well, we're getting it in, but we're well represented with our Air Force counterparts, and Dick Covey's going to do a good job today.
Okay, let's go back to launch pad 39B, the same pad from which Challenger lifted off 32 months ago. And what an intervening 32 months it has been, because America has lagged farther behind the Soviets. They've had to virtually redesign not only the space shuttle, but almost everything else, Gene Cernan.
Almost the entire system, the way people operate, the way we look at the launch. It's really a test flight of the entire spectrum of our return to space.
Lynn Scher, who's out at the VVIP area, the very, very important person area. Lynn, they've just told us now.
Director Bob Seek received a go from all elements of the launch team, including Bob Crippen, who is the Deputy Director of the National Space Transportation System and the head of the mission management team. We'll be picking up the countdown clock at 11:28 at the T-minus 9-minute point, which would give us a liftoff time at 11:37 Eastern Daylight Time this morning. During this period, recorders which document the operation of the final minutes of the countdown and the flight recorders have been turned on.
Let's go out to that area where ABC's Lynn Scher is. Lynn has covered space for us for a long time, paid an enormous amount of attention to the whole inquiry and the Rogers Commission, which found out first what was wrong with Challenger and then emphasized the redesign and restructure in the organization. Lynn, first of all, who's out there? And then give us, if you would, just a brief lesson on how much redesign there's been.
Peter, there are a number of VIPs, if you will, here. Some of them have famous names, some of them don't. But very interestingly, a number of the senators who are meant to be here have made it over to your site. They were not staying away, so they didn't stick around. They've also been kept away from us by yellow ropes and grandstands, so we'll get to them a little bit later. But one of the gentlemen who is here, of course, is William Rogers, who is head of the Rogers Commission. We haven't seen him yet. I understand he is here. He was in charge of the commission that demanded that this bird be redesigned. There are more than 400 changes on the orbiter itself, on Discovery. Most of the serious changes, however, are on those rocket boosters. And of course, it was a seal in the rocket booster that broke, if you will, that let the gas escape that caused the Challenger explosion 2.5 years ago. So the rocket boosters have been enormously redesigned. The joint that malfunctioned, another joint as well. And what NASA did was they took it upon themselves and they were directed by the president to do so, to take the opportunity to redesign the entire system. The idea was, let's see what else there might be that might cause us problems in the future. They didn't want any surprises. You know, of course, Peter, and I'm sure the world is now aware, that the leak in the rocket booster was a surprise to everyone except for a few engineers who had not let the information get up to the right places at NASA. So the astronauts have gotten more involved in management and in redesign. The engineers now have much more of a say. If they think something is wrong, their voices generally get heard. I talked to Bob Crippen a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him what the biggest change was in all of NASA in the last 2.5 years, and he said communication. He said no one is bashful about bringing up something that they think is wrong, and their concerns are heard at the top. The crew as well was very proud of the fact that they have had the opportunity, and they have taken advantage of the opportunity to sit in on meetings, to help make decisions about how the shuttle will be redesigned and how the management changes would be made. And, you know, it was really interesting, Peter. One of them said to me...
Can I just interrupt you for a second?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Peter.
You may hear faint applause, scattered applause down here, and that is because, as you can see at the bottom of your picture, item 39B, the clock has started again. We are 8 minutes, 40 seconds approximately from liftoff. Lynn, please continue, sorry.
What I was just going to add was that a number of the crew members and other astronauts I spoke to said, you know, everyone's talking about the fact that astronauts...
Down now, we'll go through this 9-minute countdown. It'll get crucial down around 2 minutes again when the computer programs start to check in. Make sure that everything's all right, and they were even giving us one warning that there may be some kind of an alarm in the cockpit because they've got these new pressure suits on that they're wearing, and they're worried about the pressure giving off a different kind of signal that may set some of those very sensitive alarms. 5-man crew on board. You should meet them because you'll be hearing a lot about them in the next 4 days. And these people are as important as the early pioneers of the American space program because they're trying to get it started again. Here is the crew, then, of the Space Shuttle Discovery.
Roger. Flight, proceed with transmission of the stored program, command.
The Discovery crew, all pros, each has flown on the shuttle at least once. 4 of the 5 have military backgrounds. Training has been intense, practicing longer on their ground, spending more than 400 hours in simulators alone. No crew has ever worked harder. Navy Captain Rick Houck, 48 years old, is commander. He flew on both Challenger and Discovery.
I think we're very well trained. I think we're ready to fly. I think we've been ready to fly for several months now.
38-year-old Marine Colonel David Hilmers is one of 3 mission specialists on board.
We can't dwell on what happened in the past, or we'll never look forward to the future.
Air Force Colonel Dick Covey, 42, is pilot. He flew on Discovery in 1985. All test pilots know that spaceflight is inherently dangerous.
As long as we have to ride rockets into Earth orbit, there's going to be a substantial risk. No matter how well you design your solid rocket motors or your main engines, there's going to be a risk.
38-year-old George Pinky Nelson, mission specialist. He's an astronomer. Mike Lounge, 41 years old, was a former Navy pilot. Like all the others, they're all married. They all have children. Daughter Kathy is 4 years old.
Kathy has several times said, Daddy, you're going to go fly the space shuttle, and it's not going to blow up, right? Asking me for some reassurance, and once she gets that, then it must be okay. You know, Daddy said it wouldn't, and so it won't. That's enough for her.
5 astronauts, often described as seasoned, cool, laconic, macho. The right stuff. 5 astronauts now in place in the Space Shuttle Discovery, going through the final moments of the countdown. We're now getting very close to what is expected to be one of the most important liftoffs in American space history, of course, an attempt to get the Space Shuttle program underway once again. Part of the modification, of course, of this system is that they now have 2 escape systems, one for the ground, one that once they're airborne, if they were at where they were, for example, on the Challenger, there is now a system that has been put in place that they hope will work. We want to show you how that might be put into effect. These astronauts are equipped with parachutes, and they'll have a space escape pole. There's no other way to describe it. It's kind of a space fire pole, in effect. They'll go out of the orbiter just like that. If they're at...
1, green light.
All clear. 4, 3.
All right, we're watching all of that with a lot of pros. Joe Engel, who's in Houston with us this morning and flew in this second space shuttle, Do you think that that system has got a lot of hazard built into it, that escape system, Joe? Do you really think that it could work?
Well, no doubt about it, it can work, Tom. It's been tested, and they've checked it out thoroughly. And for the envelope that it's designed, I think it's probably going to give a real good assurance that those guys can get out if they get into that situation.
But they'd have to do that in the first few moments of the flight, wouldn't they? Because once they get up too high, they simply wouldn't be able to use it.
Well, not necessarily. They can glide back to within the parameters as long as they can get the vehicle back under control, glide back into the atmosphere, and get a stabilized glide situation set up. Then they can get set up to blow the hatch and use the escape system.
Okay, thank you, Joe Engel, who will be with us this morning from Houston as well. All of this cost, by the way, $2.5 billion to make these modifications. That's a small price indeed. We're now coming up on just under 4 minutes to the countdown. And at this point, the crew is going through a checklist that they have on board there. Let's listen for a few moments to Hugh Harris.
T-minus 3 minutes, 30 seconds. All 3 engines now being moved in a pattern to verify their readiness to support the ascent flight control. After going through their paces, they'll be aligned to their start positions. We're coming up on the 3-minute point in the count at T-minus 2 minutes 55 seconds. The start of the external tank liquid oxygen pressurization will begin. 3 minutes and counting. And the gaseous nitrogen purges of the main engines will be terminated.
Those main engines you can see there at the bottom, those big cones sticking out from the bottom, are going to be crucial, of course, for both liftoff, and then later on we'll be seeing those engines in the flight with those close-up NASA cameras. We want to tell you that there are a couple of crucial sequences coming up. Now, O'Hara, you've watched this in the past. They're going to have to pressurize the big liquid hydrogen tank.
T-minus 2 minutes, 30 seconds.
And then when we get down to, what, about 31 seconds, everything goes on automatic, in effect.
Automatic. The computers take over on board. There's no more intervention from the firing room. It's automatically cut off if there's a problem. That's a critical milestone in the countdown, the last 28 seconds.
All right, we're getting ready, obviously, to deal with the big external tank here.
Yes, that's the nose cone that's placed over it to keep any icing off of the tip of the nose cone. And that will be removed now, and it will just vent to atmosphere. They pressurized the tank at this point in time to build up pressure to force the propellants out when the engines ignite. So those big vents have been closed, and this is a key milestone as we go toward launch.
Part of the problem, of course, with the Challenger was that it was very cold here overnight on that January in Florida in 1986. What about launching in adverse weather conditions when there is a cold snap again, as there will be?
Well, they placed heaters on the solid rocket booster joints this time, and if there is any cold weather, that should keep them warm enough.
90 seconds and counting. Less than 2 minutes away from the launch of Sts-26 and its crew of 5.
1 second, future failure.
And we have heard that the clock will hold at 31 seconds.
Now that means that there's a hold just before they begin the automatic sequence, so that we are in...
We're anticipating the clock will hold at T-minus 31 seconds due to a failure. We have not heard what that is yet.
It's going down.
That's a normal hold point in the event that there is
probably due to the increase in the O2 going into pursuit. Okay, with your concurrence, we'll clear the air.
The propellant, the propulsion hydraulic system can hold for 6 minutes today in order to protect the launch for tomorrow. And the APUs have started. They will continue to run. So if we don't hold any more than 6 minutes, we could reschedule tomorrow if there is a problem that causes us to start.
We will not stop the clock. The orbiter computers have positioned the vent doors, T-minus 31 seconds. We have a go for auto sequence start.
The problem has been cleared.
Redundant computers have assumed T-minus 23 seconds and counting. The SRB nozzle profile. T-minus 15.
Here we go.
14.
Remember the Challenger.
13, 12,
Godspeed Discovery.
11, 10. We're go for main engine start. 7, 6. Start. 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
Crew confirms roll program. Houston now controlling.
three engines at 104%. Very good APUs, very good fuel cells. Standing by to begin throttle down to 65%. Engines throttling down now to maintain a certain speed as the spacecraft passes through max Q. Standing by to see engines begin to throttle back up at about 59 seconds. Mark 1 minute, velocity 2,300 feet per second, altitude 5.9 nautical miles, downrange distance 3 nautical miles.
Discovery, go at throttle up.
Roger, go. Discovery given a go at throttle up, 3 engines at 104%, velocity 3,200 feet per second, altitude 10.8 nautical miles, downrange distance 8 nautical miles.
We've passed a crucial test here, gentlemen. Go to throttle up was the last command that we heard, of course, on Challenger.
Yes.
We're waiting for the separation of those big solid rocket boosters that you see on either side.
25 seconds from solid rocket booster separation.
They held. The orbiter is in place. It's
1 minute, 45 seconds, 3 engines at 104%.
Next, if everything goes well, which it looks like now it will.
Velocity 4,800 feet per second, altitude 20 nautical miles, downrange distance 19 nautical miles. Standing by for solid rocket booster separation.
There they go.
It looks normal.
Yep.
Looks great.
Yep. Looks great.
Solid rocket boosters have separated.
Corrections. Maroon's fan. You have to change that.
They're coming to speed plus 4 minutes now.
There it is right there. 2-engine Maroon capability.
So even if they lose an engine,
may be able to.
Breath went past it. America's back in space. I must admit, I feel very happy, and it was really thrilling. It was one of the most thrilling things that's ever happened to me.
Now we're going 8,000 feet
Now
per
can no longer
second.
turn around and return to the launch site in the event of an abort. 4 minutes, 20 seconds, velocity 8,700 feet per second, altitude 59 nautical miles, downrange distance 148 nautical miles.
That's a great sight.
what this means, if they had lost an engine now, they can still land safely in Africa.
Very soon we're going to achieve orbit capability, though.
And that means that they could lose engines and still push themselves into orbit because they've got so much velocity at this point.
Peter, how do you feel? You've been asking that all day. How do you feel?
That's fantastic. Fantastic. You could feel it in your bones here a while ago. It was going to go. There was no question about
All
it.
of indicates Discovery could reach and abort to orbit on 2 engines if that were to become necessary.
The further they go, the more
5 minutes, 3
capability.
seconds, velocity 10,300 feet per second. Altitude 65.7 nautical miles, downrange distance 203 nautical miles.
Still picking up speed.
Very quickly. They're really hauling the mail at this point in time. There's very little atmosphere to slow them down. They're getting lighter because they're burning the fuel, and those engines are still putting out just as much thrust.
Also, initially, most of the launch trajectory was vertical to get out of the atmosphere, and now it's more horizontal to go for speed.
When they get into orbit, of course, they'll go around the world at 17,000 miles per hour.
Once every 90 minutes, sunrise and the sunset.
Below, if you will, attached to, but below, it's liquid oxygen and hydrogen liquid fuel tank.
This is the way that it goes into space, and during a variety of times during the trip, they will be riding upside down. And it is something that is easy to confuse people with, but due to the methods that we have to go into space, this is the safest and the best way to get there, with the huge external tank, the fuel tank, on top, which will remain there until they make almost the first orbit.
Achieve a single-engine landing at Banjul, if that were to become...
If you will, look in the right-hand corner of your screen, we give you the down range of approximately where the Discovery is in relation to the Earth's surface. In addition to time from liftoff, it's plus 6 minutes and 40 seconds, the speed in miles per hour, and the next major event, which is, as we mentioned, is the main engine cutoff to come at about the 8.5 minute mark. Jeff?
Let's also remember at MECO, we will be in space.
We will not actually be in orbit until we fire our orbital maneuvering engines 45 minutes after launch. But we will have gotten through surely the most risky part of the whole mission.
Jeff, it's incredible to believe that it's now traveling at a speed of about 12,000 miles per hour. Its top speed, when it reaches its top speed, about
17,000.
About 17,000 miles per hour. Well, everything looks and sounds excellent at the moment, does it not, Jim?
Even if they lose 2 engines, they can still make it to orbit.
Another milestone passed. Even if they were to lose 2 of the engines now, they could still make it into orbit.
The other thing that's happening now, we have full thrust out of the engines, but because so much fuel has been burned off and it's lighter, the acceleration has built up. The crew is being pressed down into their seats with a force of 3 times Earth's gravity, and in order to avoid exceeding that, the engines are actually starting to throttle down. Let's remember, these are the first rocket engines of this size that have ever been able to throttle down.
As we wait for main engine shutdown, let's go to Peter Van Sant, who was watching with thousands of other people here at the Cape. Peter?
Dan, NASA just scored the winning touchdown late in the fourth.
Away from main engine cutoff. Velocity 24,600 feet per second. Altitude 59 nautical miles. Downrange distance 700 nautical miles. Standing by for main engine cutoff.
700 miles in 8 minutes.
Main engine cutoff confirmed. Discovery's 3 main engines have now shut down as programmed.
And still, Discovery drives forward.
It's the last big maneuver.
Discovery, nominal MECO, Holmes 1 not required.
Well, now they're in an orbit, but not completely a circular orbit. They have a low aperture of around 30, or a low perigee of around 35 miles an hour. So they're going to the high point of the orbit at about 160 miles. They'll fire their engines at that point about 40 minutes to bring up the low part of the orbit, and then it'll be 160 circular.
Let's talk for just a second when we come back about now what this means. America is back into manned space flight, and we will be back in a second to say what it means for the future of the space program and the men and women who fly in it. We'll be right back.
This has been ABC.
On that line, that bottom line, at this moment, we've got a great flight. Discovery is in orbit. Let's pause for this message.
Goes well from a human point of view. People will get involved in the romance of space again. You think that we invest too much in the romance of space?
That's a factor, and the romance of space seems to come in as we go into the first, whether it's Al Shepard's first suborbital, my orbital, and the other first steps that occurred beyond that. But you know, the value of the program is basic research, and if this nation is a product of anything, it's the basic research that we've been willing to support through the years. That, plus I don't think most Americans want to see us second place in space. Space has been a focal point of attention. The rest of the world, it has been a demonstration of our superiority in science and technology. And what we have found are tens upon thousands of kids wanting to come here to get their education. Now that results in political followership around the world. And I don't want to see the children of the world aspiring to go to Patrice Lumumba University in the Soviet Union as opposed to coming to Florida, Caltech, Ohio State, or wherever in this country. So there's that political aspect of the space program also.
All right, Senator, we're going to look at that launch one more time.
Good, I'd like to see it again.
Okay, let's take a look now. This is the successful launch now about 12 minutes ago here at the Kennedy Space Center.
3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
Crew confirms roll program. Houston now controlling. 3 engines at 104%. 3 good APUs, 3 good fuel cells. Standing by to begin throttle down to 65%. Engine throttling down now to maintain a certain speed as the spacecraft passes through max Q.
Well, whatever you think of the space program, for my money at least, that is one of the most memorable and striking pictures that anyone can ever see. The absolute epitome of high technology. All that power, all those computers on board, and then, of course, 5 highly skilled American astronauts with their hands on the controls going into space. It really is the definition of adventure.
That's really great to see a successful launch.
Altitude 5.9 nautical miles, downrange distance 3 nautical miles.
Discovery, go at throttle up.
Roger, go.
Senator Glenn, thanks very much for being with us this morning. We're going to go down to Houston now, and we have NBC's Dan Molina standing by with an active member of the astronaut corps who's watching this with NBC News Today. Dan?
Good morning, Tom. I'm here with Colonel John Blaha. John is someone who became familiar to us over the years as a Capcom in mission control, the Capcom being the person who communicates back and forth with shuttles in flight, and Colonel Blaha is now training for an upcoming flight himself. And I know that you were quite thrilled to see that liftoff successful this morning.
It was fantastic, Dan.
The primary task of this flight is the deployment of the TDRA satellite, the Tracking and Data Relay Satellite System. Now, there is one operating right now. There was one on board Challenger when Challenger exploded. This then will be the second in a series of 3 that will operate for very important reasons, do they not?
Correct, Dan.
Okay, Dan?
Can you summarize? Yes, Tom.
Yes. We're just going to break away for a moment. We want to go to NASA because we want to hear the celebration that is going on there.
Fine.
Well, to start with, wow. That was really something. It's been a long wait, 2.5 years or a little bit better than that. You guys have been working your tails off for the last, I don't know how long. Long hours, overtime, fixed all the problems, ready to go. When it's time to go, we went. All I can say is that the nation owes you a lot, and will continue to owe you a lot in the months and years to come. This is the first of a new era, as we've said before. Congratulations for a job well done.
That's James Fletcher, who is the chief administrator of NASA. And, of course, there was an enormous shakeup, the length and breadth of that organization following the Challenger.
Just let me also
the lines of authority now are much more clearly drawn, including the decision today whether to make the launch. Dick Truly and Robert Crippen, who were 2 veteran astronauts themselves, were both on site, as it were. Truly is a Navy admiral who now lives in Washington and works out of there. He was in charge of the flight operations. Crippen was the guy who was on the ground here today, and he was making the final decision about whether or not they would launch, and he was he had a very active role, obviously, in the decision about how they would make the modifications. The astronauts, after the Challenger explosion, decided that they absolutely had to get involved. With us now is someone who's been following all of this with more than passing interest, is Dr. Logsdon from George Washington University in Washington, D.C.
Good morning.
Good morning. What about the space policy of this country? That's the area that interests you most of all.
Indeed.
You've been studying it.
Well, the launch of the shuttle gets us back in the right direction. It gets this immense psychological burden off our back of having failed once and correcting that failure. Now we have to look toward the future. We have to see whether the shuttle can make 18 missions before the end of 1990, whether we're going to proceed with a permanently manned space station, and for what reasons, the kind of reasons that Senator Glenn talked to, and I think ultimately the broadest human adventure of expanding human activity beyond the immediate vicinity of this planet, out to the moon, ultimately to Mars.
Do you think the American people are committed to spending that kind of money?
I think the American people expect the program to head down that direction. The money involved in absolute terms is large. In terms of a percentage of a GNP, we're spending less than 1/4 of the money we spent at the time of Apollo. The resources are there for good ideas.
Dr. Logsdon from the Space Policy Institute.
At George Washington University.
George Washington University. Thanks very much for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
We want to tell you that everything remains on schedule with the Space Shuttle Discovery itself. It is expected to go into orbit at about 12:20 today, Eastern Daylight Time. It'll go into an orbit that's about 160 nautical miles by 161 nautical miles. That's 184 by 185 if you make that conversion. And later this afternoon, it will be deploying the satellite that it is carrying in the payload. We have to go back through that again. You'll remember that this opens up here on top. These payload doors open up, and then they've got a little launching motor in there that will put out this very important satellite that we have here, which is the Tracking and Relay Data Satellite. That's used by other space programs so that they can communicate back to Earth. One of those was destroyed when we had the Challenger explosion. So that's what's ahead this afternoon. 4 days of this flight to land at Edwards Air Force Base in California. You'll remember that as well. That's the home originally of Chuck Yeager, and he'll probably be there for the landing. Let's go back to Houston now. Dan Molina is there. Dan?
Yes, Tom, we were discussing that sequence during which the tracking and data relay satellite will be deployed. And John Blaha with me is somebody who over the years felt the need for that satellite to be deployed and for a system that would allow space shuttles to communicate with mission control over a much longer period of time, much more constantly than they're able to now. I know that has been a big headache for you over the years, Colonel Blaha.
Absolutely, Dan. Getting 2 tracking and data relay satellites up in orbit will give us a communication capability which will expand the capabilities of the shuttle and of future payloads which we plan to put up.
The first TDRS, tracking and data relay satellite, that was launched had problems when it was first launched. It's only operating with a portion of its total capacity right now. So it has been very slow getting this whole system up to full speed, has it not?
That's correct, Dan. Currently, the uplink capability of KU band doesn't work with the current satellite that's up there, and we hope that this one, plus the one which the crew that I'm with on the flight in February, will give us that full capability.
Now, the deployment sequence for this satellite will occupy the crew beginning almost immediately. They will begin the sequence which will result in the launch of that satellite. To go through that just briefly, it is a deployment sequence that first begins when the payload bay doors open. And then that satellite is tilted up into a position where it will be sprung out into space. Is that correct?
That's correct, Dan. And that activity will take place, the raising, about 4 hours from now. And the deployment about 6 hours from now.
And then the satellite will move a safe distance away from the spacecraft. The bottom of the spacecraft will be pointed toward the satellite when it ignites its engine and moves out into space. And Tom, hopefully that will go off without any hitches.
Okay, thank you very much. Dan Molina, who is in Houston today, and back here at the Kennedy Space Center with me now is Joe Kerwin. Joe, we've only got about 30 seconds left or so. What do you think? Next year at this time, we'll be launching on a very regular basis?
Well, we're going to have to work back into it. But the reason this launch was so expensive is because it took so long to get it airborne. The more often we launch, the more the cost will come down. And getting that railroad running on a regular schedule again, I'm sure, is our top priority.
Thanks very much, Joe Kerwin, for being with us, Al O'Hara, and all the people who helped us today. Special Discovery has been launched. We're going into orbit in about 20 minutes. I'm Tom Brokaw. We'll be here all day long bringing you up to date on what's going on, and I'll see you, of course, tonight on NBC Nightly News from the Kennedy Space Center. For now, good morning and good afternoon.
The clock will hold at T-minus 31 seconds due to a failure. We have not heard what that is yet.
It's going down. Probably due to the increase in the O2 going in from the suits. Okay, and with your concurrence, we'll clear the air and proceed.
T-minus 50 seconds and counting. We're going to clear the air and proceed. 1, 0, and liftoff. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Roger, roll, Discovery. Crew confirms roll program. Houston now controlling.
Monday, rise and shine with Today. Join Jane Pauley and guest host Tom Snyder for an inside look at Hollywood's biggest stars, Sigourney Weaver, Tom Hanks, and Joan Collins, plus a preview of the vice presidential debate. Today, the show that was first is still the best. Weekday mornings at 7, only on NBC.
Oh, I've slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter's silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed, enjoying the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you've not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in sunlit silence. Hovering there, I have chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up, the delirious burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent lifting mind I've trod the high untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God.
This is CNN, a network of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is a CNN special report, America's Space Mission. At the Kennedy Space Center, CNN's Bernard Shaw.
Good morning from the Kennedy Space Center here in Florida. It is now T-minus 20 minutes and counting. 20 minutes with another scheduled built-in hole until the scheduled liftoff of the shuttle Discovery, taking with it 5 astronauts and the future of the American manned space program. Just a short while ago, the launch control told us that they closed the hatch there to the orbiter, and they're about to take the handle off. Bonnie Dunbar joins us as our technical advisor. She joined us yesterday. She flew around this planet 111 times. Welcome, and we're waiting. What's the latest?
Well, we just came out of the T-minus 20-minute hold. We will count down until the T-minus 9 hold. At that point, we will hold and wait for reports on the weather balloon and the winds aloft.
And we're now at 18, T-minus 18 and counting. There have been 2 launches of weather balloons. NASA received what they call a data dump from the first one, and now they're studying information now.
I think we're very close to getting the information. We expect it very shortly. We, again, are still able to hold till 1:41 this afternoon.
That's the window.
That's the end of the window, launch window.
Okay. Tony Clark is standing by at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Tony?
Good morning, Bernie. I think it was Admiral Truly who a month or so ago said, don't be surprised if there is a delay or 2 in this first launch of the shuttle since the Challenger accident. And that's, in fact, what we've been seeing, surprisingly, because the weather is much better than anyone ever expected it would be at launch time. I think it was just a week or so ago that we were thinking about a hurricane delaying the launch. Now it is nicer weather than expected. I talked with a former astronaut who's here at the Johnson Space Center just a short time ago. He said that NASA tends to program into the computers in the shuttle a wide variation of wind speeds and directions for this time of year, but no one was expecting the winds to be lighter than they usually are this time of year. In fact, as I say, last week we were expecting high winds, perhaps hurricanes in this area. Over at Mission Control, there is a lot of excitement. Everyone is keyed up, but currently they're in kind of a holding position, monitoring the consoles. The flight controllers arrived about 4.5 hours ago. They've been watching the consoles, trying to get ready, just in case there is a launch this morning, and 7 seconds after liftoff, the control of the space shuttle shifts here to the Johnson Space Center. They're ready for that to happen. Right now, we don't know when that will happen or if it will happen today or not. At this point, we are all simply waiting for word from the Cape, word whether the launch will be scrubbed or whether it will go in a short time, a little bit later this morning. And that's all we can do right now is wait, keep our fingers crossed, and if it goes today, people here at Mission Control say they're ready. If it goes tomorrow, they will be ready then. I'm Tony Clark, CNN, reporting live from the Johnson Space Center. Bernie?
Of course, Discovery is the #1 story, but as we've been indicating all morning long on your network of record, weather is trying to steal the show. John Holloman has been tracking the weather story. John, what's the latest?
Bernie, there may be some potentially good news. As you know, the Air Force has been sending up weather balloons for the past 3 or 4 days, looking at winds throughout the Discovery flight path. With us now is Colonel Ron Rand of the Air Force here at the Kennedy Space Center. Colonel Rand, tell me what you've received in information from the latest weather balloon to have sent back information to the ground.
John, our latest balloon has given us some encouraging results. It appears the winds at upper levels have changed both in velocity and in the direction slightly in a way that lessens the problems that NASA is looking at in terms of launching shuttle this morning.
Yeah, now, before the shuttle can go up, the winds have to be from a specific direction at a specific speed based on the way the computer is programmed, as Tony Clark just explained to us. But are they now within that series of numbers that is okay?
They're not there yet, but they're getting awfully close. The direction is still out, but the velocity has lessened such that lessening the velocity lessens the impact of the winds being from the wrong direction.
I see. So
If you were a guessing man or a betting man, would you say this trend, is there a trend? Is it moving in the right direction like over a several-hour period? We've watched it all morning, and it's been gradually improving and appears to continue to move in that direction. What happens next? Do you send up another balloon, or have you sent up another one already? We sent up another balloon. We expect the results back in the next 15 to 20 minutes, and we sent up a second balloon after that one, and we should have the results back at about 10 o'clock. I see. So that's going to continue, I guess, all the way through the launch window, correct? More balloons going up? That's correct. We actually have to launch as late as 15 minutes after the launch to continue to check the upper level results after the shuttle goes through the atmosphere. All right. So if you were to summarize what you just told me, things are not totally right on for this launch from the wind. They're moving in the right direction. That's exactly right. All right. Colonel Ron Rand, thank you for joining us. John Holloman, CNN Live at the Kennedy Space Center.
And we join the voice of NASA's Launch Control, Hugh Harris.
NASA Test Director Frank Merlino asking that all of the test team personnel switch to a common channel, which they will remain on through the balance of the count. In that way, each one of them is all getting the same information. Prior to this point, they have been on separate channels in order to work the various activities associated with their functions. 15 seconds away from entering the built-in hold at T-minus 9.
Verify that the fuel cell load adjust is complete.
And we've had verification that the fuel cell load adjust is complete, and we are at T-minus 9 minutes and holding.
T-minus 9 minutes and holding.
As we come out of the hold, the ground launch sequencer takes over control, issuing commands for the final critical task and monitoring as many as 1,000 different measurements during the final 9 minutes of the count. During this count, which we expect to be extended, we'll be listening for the completion of work which has been underway. The countdown at T-minus 9 minutes and holding. This is shuttle launch control.
Of course, there are other scenarios which no one... I was just listening to see whether they would come back to us. We told you that we're going to show you a nominal launch, what happens when it's really good and when. John Holloman has that report for us. John?
That's right, Bernie. As you were pointing out a moment or two ago, there are lots of ways that the shuttle can get into orbit, but there is, in fact, only one perfect way. We have seen that happen on most of the previous launches of the space shuttle, up until, of course, the Challenger disaster. But in a situation where everything goes just as it should go, the launch scenario looks just like this.
7, 6.
At the moment of launch, shuttle crews look at their watches and begin to count the seconds for 8.5 minutes. If nothing goes wrong in that period, their launch will have been perfect. Here's what happens in the perfect 8.5 minutes. 7 seconds after launch, the shuttle clears the launch pad and begins a 7-second roll maneuver. It will turn upside down for the fast ride to space. 30 seconds after launch, the crew will slow the main engines to 65% of their rated thrust to ease passage of Discovery through a short period of maximum stress on the vehicle. Then, at about a minute into the flight, the engines throttle up to 104% of their rated thrust. Commander Rick Houck will tell Houston that Discovery is go at throttle up. It's traveling 2,551 feet every second now. The solid rocket boosters burn out and are jettisoned at 2 minutes 6 seconds after launch, and the shuttle depends on its main engines to carry it the rest of the way into orbit. The main engines should do their job almost automatically until 8 minutes 31 seconds into the mission. They'll shut down at about the point they'd run out of fuel, and then the huge external fuel tank will be jettisoned into space. The shuttle is now traveling at more than 25,000 feet per second, 17,000 miles an hour on its way to orbit. The small orbital maneuvering system engines in the tail will fire briefly to make the final adjustment to Discovery's course. At 39 minutes 45 seconds into the mission, the Discovery will be in orbit 160 miles above us.
They're going to mission.
B, whether it happens today or at some future day, the Discovery launch, if everything goes as planned, will be just like what you just saw. John Holloman, live at the Kennedy Space Center. Bernie?
John, let's listening in now to Hugh Harris, the voice of launch control here at the Kennedy Space Center.
OTC CVFS. Go ahead, VFS. Yes, T-minus 20 minutes. Dump is complete. Step 909. Okay, we copy. And TD flight. TVD, OTC. This TVD. Right, we're ready for step 917.
That's what I was trying to get with you earlier. Okay. What I wanted to do is, with the delay and closing the crew hatch, we want to work that about 10 minutes before coming out of the 9-minute hold.
This is shuttle launch control at T-minus 9 minutes and
what
holding.
You're seeing right now
at the present time, Astronaut Office Chief Dan Brandenstein taking off in the shuttle training aircraft to fly approaches to the runway and to take a look at the weather here in the Kennedy Space Center area. As far as we know at this point, the weather here is not a problem, and we have received back the results from the 8 o'clock balloon run, and it shows that we're very close to having the proper margins in order to launch this morning or this afternoon. The people who do loads analysis are in the process of taking a look at those winds and running through their computer programs to determine whether we can launch today. But in the meantime, we're continuing on with the process here. We completed the dump of the general purpose computer, and now the comparing of that with the programs in the computers here on the ground is in process. In the meantime, back at the Johnson Space Center, everything is in readiness there, and we switch to them for an update.
And this is Mission Control Houston. The Ascent Flight Control Team with the Flight Director Gary Cohen and Capcom John Creighton have been in the Mission Control Center for several hours, monitoring systems on board the Space Shuttle Discovery and keeping an eye on the weather at the transatlantic abort sites and at Edwards. Voice checks between the crew and Houston have been conducted. All positions in the flight control room appear to be go at this time. This is Mission Control Houston.
Did you copy, NTD? Go ahead.
Back here at the Kennedy Space Center, we're continuing on. We have not set a new T0 yet, as we're trying to assess exactly how long it's going to take to complete the work before we can pick up the count at the T-minus 9-minute point. We expect to hear that just a short time from now. The countdown clock at T-minus 9 minutes and holding. This is shuttle launch control.
Bonnie Dunbar, Hugh Harris, launch control voice, whom we just heard, it indicated a short while ago that they're about 30 minutes behind, regardless of where they place this next hole. So it's going to be some time. It certainly will not be a 10:59 launch this morning.
Yes, they left the hatch open for a while before they closed it out. So their programmed activities, I think they delayed until we got a better handle on what we might launch to. And so we'll wait to see what happens.
Here we see the vapors coming there from launch pad 39B. And what NASA's doing is proceeding very methodically, because they know that that window closes at 1:41 p.m. this afternoon Eastern Time?
That's true. That's when we have sunset at our transatlantic abort site in Morocco. We then would have to leave the vehicle and try again tomorrow. There is a very detailed set of procedures for each one of the console members in launch control that we follow. They've been trained to many times. They simulate just like we do at Mission Control. And they have a checklist, and we have to make certain that each one of those items has been checked off and verified before we go to the next step.
As our CNN viewers tune in now around the world watching the expected launch of the Discovery, what are the 5 astronauts doing at this moment?
Well, since they got into the vehicle, they have been working out of something we call the Ascent checklist. And there are certain functions they perform. They load some software into a backup computer. They are looking at the landing site data if we have to land a transatlantic abort or if we had to return to landing site. And right now, as part of the T-9 hold, they're waiting like we all are. We have this built-in hold because it allows us to do things like catch up in the timeline. It also allows us to get a last-minute weather update. And in fact, the checklist will tell us that we do a weather update and we wait for the go for launch, and everybody has to agree to that.
Now, you were aboard the Shuttle Challenger in 1985. You made 100 orbits of the Earth, but you sat there in the orbiter on your back for 2 hours before liftoff?
About 2.5 hours. It's slightly different for this crew. When I launched, we were wearing blue coveralls and what we called LEH helmets, and they were fairly light. We now have these special suits, pressure suits for the crew. They're much bulkier, they're a little bit warmer, so they're probably not quite as comfortable. So this is a real test of endurance, I think, to sit through this hold.
And it's a bit bulkier in that cabin now on the flight deck and down below where the fifth member is because of the added safety features.
Well, of course, there are some safety features added, but I think if you had to look at it on a percentage basis, there is more bulk, but it's not significant.
A lot of people down here are watching this scene, Launch Pad 39B. John Zarella is with the VIPs and other folks who are in a special section, but they're not as close as they used to be, John.
That's right, Bernie. The safety considerations following the Challenger accident dictated that they move this VIP site where some of NASA's special guests and dignitaries are from 3.5 miles to the launch pad to about 7.5 miles to the launch pad. Safety, of course, a big concern. I think Admiral Richard Truly, the Associate Administrator for Space Flight, told me a couple of days and put it quite clearly that the United States doesn't print enough money to make space flight entirely safe. And because we're dealing with a machine and because problems can develop, the astronauts have been given a series of abort scenarios which will enable them to bring the shuttle back to Earth safely. The space shuttle is a machine, and machines can fail. Because it is an imperfect system, NASA has built in several of what it calls abort scenarios. If the vehicle should, for example, lose one of its 3 main engines, suffer an electrical failure, cabin or fuel leak, the crew would have 4 options available. The first and most desirable is called an abort to orbit.
I can't make the orbit I want, but I can still make orbit.
This contingency would be used if one of the main engines went down after the first 8 minutes of flight and the vehicle had enough velocity and power to make a 105 nautical mile orbit. A standard orbit is 160 miles. The second option is called abort once around. In this case, instead of going into orbit, the shuttle would circle the Earth once and come back to the United States, preferably the lake bed at Edwards Air Force Base, but possibly White Sands, New Mexico, or the Kennedy Space Center. The third option is called a transatlantic landing. In this instance, the shuttle would fly across the Atlantic, using up its fuel, and then dumping its huge external tank before landing at one of 4 sites in Spain or North Africa. The final option is a worst-case scenario called the return to launch site, or RTLS abort.
There are a lot of unknowns that the margins in some...
Please subscribe by calling direct to 1-800-84.
situation, I've got to do it.
Here, the vehicle suffers a major failure within the first 4 minutes after liftoff. It flies out from the Cape, using up its solid rocket boosters and the fuel in its external tank. At a predetermined point, the vehicle does a powered pitch around. It will then be flying backwards away from the Cape until the engines overcome the outward velocity of the vehicle and it begins heading back to the launch site. As it heads to the landing strip, the nose is pitched down in order to dump the huge external tank.
And when the tank came off, the air loads would be underneath here, and they push the tank back up into the orbiter. So it's real apparent that what I've got to do now is I've got to go from this attitude down to this attitude.
This complicated maneuver takes about 22 minutes. Although computer data says it would work, no one knows for sure if the vehicle would survive the aerodynamic stress. John Zarella, CNN, at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Bernie, they say that those abort scenarios that they practice them over and over again. And, of course, the return to launch site, the most difficult, is practiced extensively by this astronaut crew.
Engineers tell us it works about 95% of the time in the shuttle simulators in Houston. The only times that it doesn't work is when so many problems are thrown at the astronauts that they just completely lose control, something that would probably not happen even in a worst-case scenario. This is John Zarella reporting live from the VIP site.
I'll tell you, John, after the many hours of reading all of the NASA booklets that I and the CNN staff have read, just watching that last piece explained so much, so very much about what they would do if and when. Well, just as you're watching around the world, watching what's happening here at Launch Pad 39B, here in the state of Florida, just beyond the gates of this place, they tell us that an estimated 1 million people or more, all the way from the Yukon, are down here. And when we got out of bed at 4:30 this morning to leave at 5:30 to get here at 6, you should have seen the traffic jam. Hundreds and hundreds and thousands of cars. Well, when we come back, we'll check in with Houston, the Johnson Space Center, and get the latest update from those folks as your network of record continue its live coverage of the shuttle Discovery when it lifts off. Astronaut Bonnie Dunbar here with us as we continue our coverage from Cape Canaveral, the the Kennedy Space Center. Bonnie, we're in a hole now. What's happening?
Well, we're in a planned hold at T-minus 9 minutes, and we're using this period to do two things. We're catching up on some activities, such as checking the cabin for its pressure integrity, but also waiting for the latest weather balloon. The last one we had did say that the wind was shifting. It had decreased, it was putting us in a better posture, but it was still slightly out of margin. So we'll wait for this next balloon, and at the same time we have engineers off looking at what would happen if we flew with this slight off nominal wind and looking at the loading on the structure.
What are those 5 guys aboard the orbiter doing right now?
Well, they are catching up on some activities they're participating in. They participate in some of these checks, check the data on displays. They are loading some software into a backup computer, checking their landing site data, a number of things, and waiting for us to come out of the hold.
Tony Clark is at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Tony, 7 seconds after the orbiter lifts off from that Launch Pad 39B, control reverts to Johnson. What's the mood over there where you are?
Heard from Steve Nesbitt a short time ago. He's the spokesman, the mission control spokesman. In fact, most people will remember his voice from 32 months ago. He is the gentleman that told the world the obvious, that there was a major malfunction in the shuttle Challenger as it exploded. Just a short time ago, Steve Nesbitt informed everyone that most of the controllers have been there for about 4.5, 5 hours now. They have been looking at their consoles. They've had information dumped into their computers from the computers at the Kennedy Space Center. As you say, Bernie, for the launch itself, for those first 7 seconds and the countdown leading up to it, all the control for the space shuttle is out of the Kennedy Space Center. Then, just as the shuttle clears the tower, and that's about 7 seconds into the launch, everything shifts here, and so you want to make sure that all the information in the computers are the same as they are at Kennedy, have them both the same, Kennedy and the Houston Space Center. And so they've dumped all that information. Everyone has gotten ready. They have been monitoring those consoles so that when a launch does occur, whether that is today or tomorrow or whenever, they will be ready. Brian Welch, he's a public affairs spokesman, was telling us just a short time ago that the mood is up in mission control. Everyone is excited. They would be a little disappointed if things end up being delayed, but they're ready to go whenever it is time for the shuttle to be launched. I'm Tony Clark, CNN, reporting live from the Johnson Space Center. Bernie?
And of course, they had mentioned 10:59. That has come and gone. It will not be 10:59, but we'll be right here until they do launch. We'll continue our coverage in just a moment.
As it's launching, I'm going to be, my heart and my blessings will be with the astronauts and their families. You know, they're our personal friends, and we love them, and we respect them, and we understand.
This is a CNN special report, America's Space Mission. At the Kennedy Space Center, CNN's Bernard Shaw.
The latest we've learned here is that NASA is planning to restart the clock. It has that built-in hole, but they're going to restart it at 11:21, 21 minutes past the hour. And that is the hole right now at T-9. There are some 5,000 members of the news media covering this launch from all corners of the globe. For the last shuttle launch, Challenger, there were just about 500 journalists down here. And those who were not here learned a lesson that shuttle flights may have been proceeding on a regular schedule, but that they could not be considered routine. John Holloman joins us once again to take a look at what else we may have learned from a disaster, one that is still so very utterly fresh in our minds, one that in just about three months or so will have been 3 years. Of course, we refer to the Challenger. Correspondent John Holloman will be telling us about that in just a second. Let's listen in, though, to the voice of launch control.
The briefing that he normally gives at the T-minus 20-minute point, in which he briefs the team on the way in which holds may be called and on the various information that they need to know during the final part of the countdown. One of the things which he mentioned was that the window will extend for this morning's launch from 11:30 a.m. To 1:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time this afternoon. The COLA, which he referred to, is a collision avoidance time, and we will not launch from 12:13 to 12:19 to avoid any possibility of collision with objects which might be in orbit at the present time. Not only are we concerned with any collision, but also with coming too close to any of the large orbiting objects, such as the Soviet space station Mir.
CCL 212. Go ahead, HCL. Yeah, we're approaching our upper limit on the PPO2 sensors. Wonder if we could ask the crew to stop and close the valve. Hotel. ISL.
Cut
ISL. Yeah, this is KBC.
As we were saying, we noted that there were about 500 journalists covering the launch of the shuttle Challenger. Today we have more than 4,000 journalists down here, and certainly the news media have learned that you cannot take any launch of a shuttle orbiter as routine. And let's go to John Holloman now, who's got more on some other things that cannot be taken for granted. John?
You know, Bernie, for the past 32 months, the people in NASA, and all the contractors who work on the space shuttle for NASA, in the Congress, in the Reagan administration, and in the public, have been thinking about the pictures that they saw live on CNN from the very place where I am standing 32 months ago. And after looking and compiling all the lessons that different people had learned, we have come up with sort of a synopsis of the many, many lessons of Challenger. The Challenger would have flown successfully if the weather at Cape Canaveral had been warm. The morning of January 28, 1986 was icy cold here. So when the Challenger's solid rockets ignited, cold-stiffened putty in the right lower field joint simply gave way, sending hot rocket exhaust gases into the joint. The 6,000-degree gases found no resistance at a cold primary O-ring, and because the rocket was bulging from pressure, the second O-ring was not sealed either. And again, the hot gas blasted to the outside. 2.5 seconds later, the shuttle continued to rise, and the deadly booster fault was sealed temporarily by burning aluminum oxide from the rocket exhaust. When Challenger passed through high winds at the point of maximum dynamic pressure, about a minute into the flight, that temporary seal was broken, and 6,000-degree flame burned through the lower half of the external tank where the liquid hydrogen was stored. Seconds later, the rocket nose struck the top of the huge tank, releasing liquid oxygen, which mixed with the hydrogen, causing the explosion and destroying the Challenger nearly 9 miles above the Earth. Within a week of the accident, a presidential commission headed by former Secretary of State William Rogers was hard at work on Challenger. meeting with all the principals, attempting to raise the curtain that surrounded the space agency. It took the Rogers Commission 6 months just to find out what happened, and it uncovered what the commission called a more serious problem. NASA was not communicating with itself and was keeping some problems, such as the history of O-ring faults, secret from top management. In the 32 months since the accident, NASA and commission members say these problems have been dealt with.
They've not only done all the things that we recommended, but they've gone beyond that and fixed the things that they themselves knew were wrong and which they continued to fly with even knowing that they were wrong.
A team of rocket scientists from booster maker Morton Thiokol and the space agency spent years fixing the problems and remaking the boosters that are going to send Discovery into orbit. There have been hundreds of changes made in an effort to make the shuttle safer. More than 50 in the boosters, 200 in the orbiter, and scores in the main engines and other systems.
We have improved the reliability of the redesigned solid rocket motor significantly over the solid rocket motor that flew on the Challenger, to where it's a very safe and reliable motor.
The other problem with people is harder to solve, but NASA is working on it. All the major figures who were involved in the decision to launch Challenger in the cold resigned, retired, or were replaced. New lines of communication have been opened to make sure anyone who suspects a problem with the shuttle can have that concern investigated and put to rest.
The biggest change for the good is the openness. There were clearly, as a result of the Challenger accident, a lot of mistakes made by a lot of people. Nobody was prepared for that.
I think the communications are quite open now, and so everybody's upbeat and we're ready to go do it.
But everyone in NASA, from top to bottom, knows that human beings can and will make mistakes. And someday in the future, there will be another shuttle accident. The space scientists say their job now is to guarantee that the time of the next accident is as far into the future as they can make it. John Holloman, CNN at the Kennedy Space Center.
Let's listen in now to launch control for a moment.
Red blood cells experiment.
I presume we'll get a update on availability.
An isoelectric focusing experiment, which is a technique for separating compounds by utilizing the differences in their electrical and chemical properties. Another is the protein crystal growth experiment.
This will be your camera.
And the physical vapor transport of organic solids experiment. This is a 3M experiment, which is to obtain thick and highly ordered crystalline films on selected substrates. The countdown continuing on, we're in the process of completing the cabin leak checks and the venting of the cabin pressure into the payload bay. Everything going satisfactory as we look for a liftoff at 11:30 a.m. this morning. This is Shuttle Launch Control.
$2 billion of American taxpayers' money was put into this orbiter that you're looking at. Safety improvements that were deemed necessary by not only NASA officials but the Rogers Commission. And when we come back, we're going to talk intimately about some of the critical changes made. Now let's listen to the latest from Launch Control. An important poll is being conducted among the directors,
to verify that they are sure that we should continue on, and he will report his findings to the launch director.
Go ahead. Can we verify the count will?
Since the Challenger accident, the shuttle Discovery and its systems have undergone close inspection and overhaul. Literally hundreds of changes have been made on the orbiter, the external fuel tank, the shuttle main engines, and the solid rocket boosters. Several of the more obvious changes involve safety, specifically in the area of getting the crew out of the shuttle in the event of an emergency. The Discovery is the first shuttle to provide a way for the crew to bail out. If an emergency were declared where the spacecraft is gliding and could not get back to a runway after launch, the crew would leave through a side hatch. They would get an assist from a small rocket pack. This boost, combined with a long telescoping pole, is designed to push the crew members far enough out of the hatch to make sure they do not fall into the shuttle's wings. Once clear, they use these parachutes for descent, and they will be carrying survival gear. If an emergency were to happen before launch, the astronauts and mission specialists have been given a new way to exit the pad. Once out of the orbiter, they are supposed to hop into a couple baskets, which are suspended from a wire leading to the ground. Then they just slide down this wire. A system of nets has been set up on the ground to slow and stop the baskets as they reach the bottom. An armored personnel carrier is left on standby to whisk the crew away from there. Perhaps the most important changes are those made to the solid rocket booster joints, which are blamed for the Challenger accident. The joint has been beefed up. An extra lip has been added to make it more sturdy, and an extra rubber O-ring is in place. On the outside of that O-ring is in place to prevent the gases from escaping. On the outside of the joint, a new heating system has been added. It is designed to keep the joint temperature above 75 degrees Fahrenheit, no matter what the outside temperature. In addition, internal changes have been made with the intent of using the rocket's own thrust to provide a tighter seal at the joint. Joining us now with more on this very important change, Keith Henson, solid rocket seal expert. You have a model of the old and the new.
Yes, Bernie, I do. This is a model of just the joint itself, which is a slice out of the cylinder of the overall solid rocket motor. The particular one that I'm holding here is one from the 51L, or Challenger launch. And as you can see, it included two O-rings, a simple tang-clevis arrangement.
These are the two O-rings there.
Yes, only a slice of them. In their totality, they would go 360 degrees around the solid rocket motor case. The basic function of the joint, of course, is to contain the chamber pressure due to combustion of the solid rocket motor from this side, preventing it to escape through the crack of the tang-clevis joint to the outside.
Now, Keith,
so the O-rings pressed in are theoretically provided to accomplish that function.
Could you just hold up the new with the old before you continue, just so viewers can see what the two look like side by side?
With respect to the tang-clevis arrangement, the augmentation or the design enhancement is very simply the incorporation of a capture feature, as we call it.
Okay, let's point that to the other camera. That's right. Now, could you hold them side by side, just so that viewers can make a comparison? Okay. And the new one is this one.
The one in my left hand is the new one.
Okay, that's the new one.
With the capture feature. The one in my right hand is the old 51L design.
Okay.
The basic function, of course, of the capture feature is to prevent deflection of the tang versus the clevis when you go from zero pressure to like 1,000 psi inside the motor case at ignition, which obviously would cause a deflection in the system and give the O-ring mating surfaces to the structure the opportunity to deflect. The presence of the capture feature locks things in place and prevents that kind of thing.
Before you continue, we just want to point out to our viewers that in 4 minutes they will resume the count. An 11:30 launch, weather permitting. The count will resume in 4 minutes. Keith, picking up on what you were saying, are you satisfied with this? Is it adequate?
Well, we've had what we consider to be a very extensive test program. This particular redesigned joint has been tested on approximately 40 full-scale pressurization tests. Some of those under very adverse conditions with intentional flaws built into the hardware in order to penetrate the hardware to the secondary and the primary O-rings and demonstrate their functionality. There are other features to the basic design, namely the internal insulation that sits over the joint has also been redesigned to incorporate what we call a J-seal, which, under the augmentation of the chamber pressure in ignition, locks the insulation in place and, in fact, prevents the pressure and hot gases from really ever getting to the O-ring seals.
The J-seal directs the gases away.
That's right. But we have run tests in this 40 test that I mentioned, where we flawed all of that system and allowed the hot gases and the high pressure to reach the O-rings. So we feel quite confident by demonstrating our redundancy and primary functions that we have a good system.
Thank you. We're going to pause, and we'll be right back at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Countdown scheduled to resume any second now. Let's listen in to launch control.
Weather's report. CDR, we copy. We need a repeat on weather. Yeah, he's down in the mud. Cape Weather, launch director, you want to summarize the current op again, please, sir? Roger, sir. Stand by. Cape Weather, you're very weak. Can you try another comm? This is Cape Weather on 312. How do you hear me? Well, you're very weak, but readable. Discovery, can you copy Cape Weather? Negative. Would you just relay his report, please? Okay, Rick. Well, what we've got in the local area is winds are northeasterly, and they're less than 10 knots. Current weather conditions, we got some scattered low stuff below 5,000. We got some showers offshore that are topping out around 14,000. None of that is within 10 miles. Okay, thanks very much. Go ahead, Cape Weather. Roger, sir. We have small showers in about 10 to 11 miles here to the west. Yeah. I copy, and they're moving to the west. Okay, and you're still go Cape Weather. ITD 212. Go ITD. Sequence 16973, hold fire system is enabled. I copy it. Payloads, are you ready for count resumption? We're ready for count resumption now. We need an AT0. Okay, copy. Okay, this launch director, why don't you set that for, we come out of the hold in approximately 3 minutes. I copy, and TLS, NTD. Would you set the clock to come out at 15:28 GMT? I copy. And about 3 minutes, 10 seconds or thereabouts.
How do you expect that? You know what's going on if you keep talking.
This is Shuttle Launch Control. We have just heard Launch Director Bob Seek receive a go from all elements of the launch team, including Bob Crippen, who is the Deputy Director of the National Space Transportation System and the head of the Mission Management Team. We'll be picking up the countdown clock at 11:28 at the T-minus 9-minute point, which would give us a liftoff time at 11:37 Eastern Daylight Time this morning. During this period, recorders which document the operation of the final minutes of the countdown and the flight recorders have been turned on. Just 1 minute before the countdown resumes, the Oasis payload in the orbiter bay will be activated to report its findings at the high bit rate. The Oasis instrumentation is designed to determine the environment of the payload bays, such as the effects of temperature, pressure, vibration, and will be used for the design of future payloads and upper stages.
We'd like you to consider us closing our visors a little bit later in the count, just to lessen the probability of getting that PPO2 alarm. Okay, we copy. Do you have a recommended time? 2 minutes. 2 minutes? We copy. That's affirmed. 2 minutes. We copy.
A minute and a half away from picking up the countdown. We've just had a request from the crew that they close their visors a little later in the count at the T-minus 2-minute point.
COEX OTC.
Tony Clark, you're at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. How's it looking over there?
Bernie, everyone is excited here. The news that we just had that everything appears to be go for a launch here in just about 10 minutes or so has brought a little bit of excitement both at Mission Control and here in Building 9A. This is the building where a lot of the simulators are. We have people, NASA employees, that have been standing around monitors. These are monitors that show what is called NASA Select. It's pictures of the launch. You hear from Hugh Harris, things that are going on at the Cape. People have been gathered around those all morning long, waiting for word whether or not there was going to be a launch. There was kind of a feeling of a little disappointment a short time ago when weather was holding things up. But the news that we had just a short time ago has kind of brightened everyone's spirits, not only here, but in all the buildings, I think, around the Johnson Space Center. Over about a block or so away at Mission Control, people have been getting ready for now about 5.5 hours. They've been manning the consoles. They've had a dump of data. They've had data moved from the Kennedy Space Center here to the Johnson Space Center so that the computers here match the computers at the Kennedy Space Center. The information, we just got word they are starting the countdown again. It's the countdown is resumed less than 9 minutes before launch, and that's the kind of thing that these people, in fact, the people all around here at the Johnson Space Center have been looking forward to. I see smiles behind me. There are smiles in Mission Control as everyone gets ready for this launch. It is something that the people here have been waiting 2.5 years for. I remember some of the astronauts and many of the people at the Kennedy Space Center and the Johnson Space Center have been saying they didn't want to get too excited. Let's go now to Hugh Harris.
And Flight OTC, I'd like to have you proceed with the transmission of the stored program command.
Coming up the 8-minute point, T-minus 8 minutes and counting.
Flight OTC.
The Orbiter Test Director has requested that Houston send the stored program commands, which is the final update on antenna management and frequency changes. This ensures that the orbiter has the latest information to speak to various ground tracking stations as it circles the Earth.
Roger. Flight, proceed with transmission of the stored program command.
T-minus 7 minutes, 30 seconds and counting, and the ground launch sequencer has started retracting the orbiter crew access arm. This is the walkway used by the astronauts to enter the orbiter. In case of an emergency, the arm can be placed back into position within about 15 seconds.
Okay, we copy.
Intense anticipation picking up. You can feel it here. We're going to pause and we'll be right back to the Kennedy Space Center. Discovery is inching closer and closer to the moment of truth. Let's listen to launch control.
Power units, which provide hydraulic power for steering and controlling flight surfaces. T-minus 5 minutes and counting.
Let's go for orbiter APU start. And BLT, perform the APU restart. Roger, and work.
Pilot Dick Covey now is flipping the 3 switches in the cockpit to start each of the 3 APUs. The liquid oxygen replenishing of the LOX tank has been terminated at this point, and the liquid oxygen fill and drain valve is closed. 4 minutes, 30 seconds.
The APUs are up and running. Copy that.
The auxiliary power units up and running, according to pilot Dick Covey.
CDR reconfigure heaters. Roger, that's complete.
Coming up on the 4-minute point in the count. The crew would normally close their visors, but will delay that. The main engine final purge sequence is underway. The orbiter flight control surfaces, such as elevons, speed brakes, and rudders, are now being moved through a pre-programmed pattern to verify that they're ready for launch. T-minus 3 minutes, 30 seconds. All three engines now being moved in a pattern to verify their readiness to support the ascent flight control. After going through their paces, they'll be aligned to their start positions. We're coming up on the 3-minute point in the count. At T-minus 2 minutes 55 seconds, the start of the external tank liquid oxygen pressurization will begin. 3 minutes and counting. And the gaseous nitrogen purges of the main engines will be terminated.
Go for ET-LO2 pressurization.
The ground launch sequencer has started to retract the gaseous oxygen vent hood.
That man is Gary Cohen. He's at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. 7 seconds after Discovery is off the launch pad at 39B, his will be the voice you'll hear for the duration of what's happening with the Discovery.
The fuel cells has been turned off. Discovery is now running on its onboard reactants. T-minus 2 minutes and counting. Liquid hydrogen replenish of the external tank has stopped and pressurization to flight level is underway. The vehicle is now isolated from all ground propellant and fluid loading equipment.
Roger, that's complete. CLS is go for ET-LH2 pressurization.
T-minus 90 seconds and counting. Less than 2 minutes away from the launch of Sts-26 and its crew of 5. And we have heard that the clock will hold at 31 seconds.
PDSD, it's a cabin pressure rate of change. Okay, copy. DCL.
We're anticipating the clock will hold at T-minus 31 seconds due to a failure. We have not heard what that is yet.
It's going down. Probably due to the increase in the O2 going in from the suits. Okay, with your concurrence, we'll clear the air and proceed.
T-minus 50 seconds and counting. We're going to clear the air and proceed. Had a concurrence from the launch director to proceed.
And if we clear, we will not stop at 31. Is that true? That's correct, MTD.
We will not stop the clock. The orbiter computers have positioned the vent doors, T-minus 31 seconds. We have a go for auto-sequence start. Discovery's 4 redundant computers have assumed T-minus 23 seconds and counting. The SRB nozzle profile, T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. We're go for main engine start, 7, 6, start, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Roger, roll, Discovery. Curves roll program, Houston now controlling. 3 engines, 104%. Throttle in 65%. Now to maintain a certain speed as the spacecraft passes through max Q. Velocity 2,300 feet per second, altitude 5.9 nautical miles, downrange distance 3 nautical miles.
Discovery, go at throttle up. Roger, go.
Discovery given a go at throttle up. 3 engines at 104%. Velocity 3,200 feet per second. Altitude 10.8 nautical miles. Downrange distance 8 nautical miles. At 25 seconds from solid rocket booster separation.
Bonnie Dunbar, I am drained. How do you feel?
Well, it's not over yet, but it's looking very, very good.
Well, there was a great relief once they got past in the flight where Challenger exploded. And everyone, you could feel the relief.
Well, we made it through the max dynamic pressure, and it is a relief, but I think it's looking good, and we'll just hold tight and make sure. We're just seeing solid rocket booster separation now.
There you go.
And we're on the main engine. And we're into stage 2. Which you see those main engines cut off at about 8 minutes and 38 seconds.
What are they doing right now?
Well, of course, they're reading the same checklist I've got here. They're looking at their displays, their engine parameters, monitoring their instruments.
3 APUs still
Of
running
course,
normal.
we spend 90% of our ASNet training for aborts, so I'm sure that if anything were to go wrong, they'd automatically go to that procedure, but it looks very good at this point.
We'll be hearing some call-ups here shortly from the Capcom about the capability to reach transatlantic sites. Velocity 6,200 feet per second, altitude 41 nautical miles, downrange distance 60 nautical miles.
I can envision 5 sets of smiles up there on board the orbiter, Bonnie.
Well, I think they'll actually smile a little bit later. They may be smiling now, but they're listening to their calls and watching their engines. We have a number of calls about what our abort sites are available should we lose an engine up until the 8-minute point. And
here's a woman who is so utterly happy.
Discovery, 2-engine Marone. Roger.
That call-up indicating Discovery may be able to achieve a transatlantic abort at Marone if that were to become necessary. Return status to mission control. Positions all report go. 3 engines still 104%. Velocity 7,600 feet per second. Altitude 53 nautical miles. Downrange distance 107 nautical miles.
Bar time tonight.
It all started here.
Standing by for data
39B.
return.
Discovery, negative return.
And that call means that...
Negative return.
That call-up indicates Discovery now can no longer turn around and return to the launch site in the event of an abort. 4 minutes, 20 seconds. Velocity 8,700 feet per second. Altitude 59 nautical miles. Downrange distance 148 nautical miles. Standing by for press to ATO call.
Press to ATO, select Banjul. Look out.
Call-up indicates Discovery could reach an abort to orbit on 2 engines if that were to become necessary. 5 minutes, 3 seconds. Velocity 10,300 feet per second. Altitude 65.7 nautical miles. Downrange distance 203 nautical miles.
It's good to hear now that you could, if you had to abort, you could do it with the 2 engines now.
Press to Amigo
That's
call.
right. In fact, what he was calling was one of the abort calls that we have. There'll be several called up here as we get farther down range. We have, the last one is an abort to orbit. Should we have an engine failure, we can still make it to a lower orbit as was described earlier at 105 miles.
Discovery, press to Miko, group Banjul 109.
Okay.
Roger.
And you've got that checked out, huh?
Yeah.
Cutoff call indicating they can proceed to normal main engine cutoff on 2 engines if that were to become necessary.
Discovery, performance, nominal. Roger, nominal.
And as each second ticks off, The United States
6 minutes, 10
space
seconds.
program is
13,000,
looking better and better and coming back.
68 nautical miles.
Well, it appears that we are going to make it to orbit.
Discovery, single engine man Joule 104.
Everything is...
That call indicates Discovery could achieve a single engine landing at Banjul if that were to become necessary. Banjul, one of the transatlantic abort sites.
Main engine start, 7, 6, start, 3.
This is a replay of what happened a short while ago here at
And liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Roger roll, Discovery.
Crew confirms roll program. Houston now controlling. 3 engines at 104%. 3 good APUs, 3 good fuel cells.
Tony Clark is in Houston at the Johnson Space Center, and as we indicated 7 seconds after Discovery was off the launch pad 39B, Johnson assumed control over there. Tony, what was it like in that room where you were? We felt the earth shake here in Florida.
Bernie, it was exciting. People here are all excited. In Mission Control, about a block away, cheers went up. Everybody's excited. Everybody is waiting, though, for a very important call, a call that's coming up, and that's MECO. That's main engine cutoff. Dick Covey said prior to this launch, that stick with us till MECO, because that's the important call when we get to orbit and the main engine's cut off. But here we've had cheers periodically. Cheers as the shuttle launched off the pad. Cheers went up again when we had the separation of the solid rocket boosters. People have been standing around the monitors here in the simulation room in Building 9A throughout the morning, watching, hoping that things would, that the weather conditions would improve, wanting to see a launch today. They got what they wanted. They saw the launch. We saw thumbs go up. As I said, we had cheers go up in the Space Center and Mission Control here in the Building 9A. People are just very excited. It has been a long 2.5 years for the people here at the Johnson Space Center. Everybody is much like a family here at the at NASA, and everybody has been waiting and hoping for this. Now everybody is standing by, waiting for that call that comes 8 minutes after launch. The MECO call, the main engine cutoff when they get up to orbit, and as Bonnie knows quite well, that's perhaps our next really big call. Bernie?
Bonnie, what does it look like? Was that it?
Yeah, we're nominal MECO.
Okay, and so that means as you smile and I smile and everybody's happy, that means at this point?
It means at this point we can get on with the business of what we're supposed to do in orbit. We're going to deploy a satellite today, and then we're going to perform some experiments in material science and in medicine, biology, physiology, and come back in 4 days.
Yes, and they're going to put out that satellite in a little less than 6 hours. Your network of record will continue its live coverage of this truly historic launch of Discovery in a moment.
For main engine start, 7, 6, start, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Roger roll, Discovery.
Crew confirms roll program. Houston now controlling.
As the Discovery astronauts head for orbit, we're going to head across away from the Kennedy Space Center here. Jeff Levine, you were with these thousands of people who are out there watching. What's it like out there now?
Well, Bernie, it's pure happiness. I think that's the proper way of characterizing it. You could see perfectly the liftoff, the orange plume breaking the sky, and then a few seconds later you could hear the roar, and then you could hear the cheers, and you could see the tears. And one person who came all the way from the Washington, D.C. area is Mary Beard. Your first launch in person, what was it like? Tell me.
Absolutely fantastic. Unreal. It's hard to believe.
What brought you down here? It's a long way.
I've always wanted to see the shuttle go up. Last mission we were working with the computer, so I couldn't get down. I promised myself I'd get down. Before I retired September 7th. And
so you're working with the space program?
No, not no more. I just retired.
But you did?
Yeah.
Did you have a lot of trepidation about it after all? We all know what happened last time.
I thank God it went up safe. Thank God. Thank you, Jesus. Yes.
Mary Beard, thanks for coming. And we're going to throw to Bernie, and back to you, Bernie.
The Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, has been watching what's happened here.
Now, unless someone else has broken the news already, before we begin, I'd like to tell you that at 11:37, the Space Shuttle Discovery lifted off at the Kennedy Space Center. And it's now headed into orbit, and America is back in space. We're now looking forward to the successful completion of the Discovery mission and the safe return of her 5-member crew. We salute the bravery of Rick Hawk, Dick Covey, Pinky Nelson, Mike Lowndes, and Dave Hilmers, and we ask God to bless this important voyage. They sure were considerate in their timing. Just gave me time to get out here without being late. Well, after looking down the list of what all your organizations have done, I have to say you are America's good Samaritans, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the White House. This is a very special day for me. It's the last time I'll get to present the presidential citations for private sector initiatives. This is a program that we started here in 1984 to help recognize the outstanding volunteer efforts of business organizations and dedicated people like you. Today, there are some 4,500 sea flags waving.
As President Reagan speaks there at the White House, and we heard him announce to his audience, if they hadn't heard, that the Discovery is heading for orbit, I just can't help remembering that January day. I was at the White House along with the other anchors. We were getting a briefing because the President's State of the Union address was to be delivered that night, and we were sitting in the Roosevelt room, just sitting down to lunch. And Donald Reagan, the then Chief of Staff, was seated at the end of the table. An aide walked in, handed him a note. His face just froze, and of course he was announcing that the shuttle Challenger had blown up. And you recall what the President went through that day, the State of the Union address, what you, all of us, the nation, the families, the relatives, the friends, people around the world went through. What a difference nearly 3 years have made. The United States space program is heading on the wings of the shuttle, the orbiter right now, going into orbit, and we'll continue our live coverage, not only from the Kennedy Space Center, but from the Johnson Space Center as well. We'll be right back in just a moment.
And liftoff. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Roger roll, Discovery.
Crew confirms roll program. Houston now controlling. 3 engines at 104%.
And welcome back, Bonnie. They're talking to Capcom now, you said just a second ago as we were coming out of that commercial.
Yes, the Capcom brasshead here is John Creighton. They were having a discussion with him about some sensors. I didn't follow it completely, but everything seems to be doing well. And at about 39 minutes, we'll perform what's called an orbiter maneuvering system burn, an OMS burn, puts us into a circular orbit. And so that slight burn will put us at 160 miles, and then we'll continue with the rest of our on-orbit operations.
And what are they doing right now? You actually having flown the shuttle before, Bonnie has before us, I don't know whether you can see it, but she has laid out the second-by-second flight plan right now, and you're noting on my line here that OMS 2 burn, very important in the sequence.
Well, yes, because it does put us into the proper orbit from which that we are able to stay in orbit instead of being in elliptical orbit, and also the orbit that we plan to deploy the satellite from, the TDRS. So we need this burn. What I have in front of me are copies of the checklist that the crew actually have on board, one being an ascent checklist, and the other is called a crew activity plan, which lays out our activities not only hour by hour, but once we get on orbit, you'll see it lays us out by minute. And this is what we spend up to a year and a half rehearsing before we fly.
Before you ever go to the launch pad.
Absolutely.
And when we were coming out around, what was it, about 5:35 this morning, it was still dark outside. We were making our way in a car to our CNN work spot here. You were pointing out that right now, astronauts are training for missions that will occur in 1990, 91, 92.
Well, we have astronauts in our office following these missions. We work with the customers. We work with experimenters and even helping to design their hardware. We assign an official crew somewhere between a year and a half, depending on whether or not it's a space lab mission. So you can train 16, 18 months before you actually fly on a specific mission.
And the 5 men on this mission, they all are a very experienced crew.
They've each flown twice. They are members of both the 78 and 80 classes. I have a couple classmates on that flight.
Mm-hmm. Which ones?
Well, Dave Hilmers and Mike Lounge were in my class.
Is it unusual for NASA to pack that many heavies, that many experienced pros, and 2-3/5 of these guys represent some of the best combat flying in Vietnam, and thousands of miles flight time behind that stick? Is it unusual?
Well, it's actually a combination of factors. Most of his crew had been put together ever before the accident.
Mm-hmm.
They were to fly a different mission. They had a different pilot. He went back to the Air Force. But we have 3 military astronauts on board and 2 civilians. It's a typical mix. I think that there was an effort to try to make sure we had at least a flown person on because of the importance of this mission. But generally what we try to do and have done in the past is to mix the crews, because obviously you have to start someone flying at some point to give them experience, to be experienced. And on my flight, it was my first flight, but with 4 other people.
We will continue our coverage of the flight of the Shuttle Discovery in a moment.
This is a CNN special report, America's Space Mission. At the Kennedy Space Center, CNN's Bernard Shaw.
Officially, NASA calls the Shuttle Discovery Space Shuttle Mission Sts-26. Well, a short while ago, after Sts-26 lifted off from Launch Pad 39B, in launch control, the administrator, the head of NASA, Dr. James Fletcher, addressed his people.
Well, to start with, wow, that was really something. It's been a long wait, 2.5 years, or a little bit better than that. You guys have been working your tails off for the last, I don't know how long hours, overtime, fixed all the problems, ready to go. When it's time to go, we went. All I can say is that the nation owes you a lot, and will continue to owe you a lot in the months and years to come. This is the first of a new era, as we've said before. Congratulations for a job well done.
And Dr. Fletcher, no doubt, pleased that he was proved wrong. You might recall, if you were with us early this morning, CNN's John Holloman talked with Jim Fletcher, and he allowed us how he thought that it was a 50-50 chance it could go either way, that it wouldn't go, and he said, and it might not go. And of course it went, and he's bursting with pride. John Zarella is down in the VIP section, and he has a very important guest. John?
That's right, Bernie. With me is Kathleen Beers, and like so many of us, Kathleen was here 2.5 years ago on that very unfortunate day. But Kathleen was here for a very special reason. She was one of the 10 finalists in the Teacher in Space contest, and it must have been an agonizing 2 years and 8 months for you.
It was a long 2.5 years, it really was, and it was almost approaching the 3 years, and it's been a long wait. I feel so exhilarated now. I feel really weightless. I feel like I put in a month's work and when those main engines were lit. I mean, this one's for Challenger. I was just so excited. This is, I feel like I'm floating. This is fantastic.
I imagine it must feel as if a giant weight has been lifted off your shoulders.
You bet. My feet aren't touching the floor and the ground. And I remember several times when Scobie would say in training, when things were like lagging a little bit, and Scobie would say, time to press on, time to press on. And believe me, when they lit those main engines, all I could think of Scobie saying, time to press on. And I thought, go for it. This is for that whole crew. Their mission continues. This put closure to it, because up to that time the chapter was unwritten. And today we're on our way. It's all been too good. From 1904, Wright Brothers, we grew wings at Kitty Hawk, and we put footprints on the moon, and Skylab and Spacelab and the shuttle missions. And we can't, there's no going back. We've got to go out there for the 21st century and explore and discover. And I'm just so glad we're back on track.
Well, your eyes were glued to the launch pad. I know some of us didn't want to watch it.
They were glued. I was crying. Oh, it was just fantastic.
What's next now for you?
I hope to be on it. I really do. In fact, someone said at the hotel this morning, what will you be thinking 5 seconds before liftoff? And I said, Godspeed, and I wish I were on it.
And you have no reservations of flying on the space shuttle?
None at all. Absolutely none. Pioneering is a special privilege, and there are things in life that are worth the discovery, the exploration, that transcend the risk and the danger.
You're a school teacher, 10th, 11th, 12th graders. What do you say to those many school children who watched 2 years and 8 months ago and now watched again?
Things are fine. It's fixed. Problems arise, and the space system will always be state-of-the-art and on the edge of technology, and nothing is completely safe, and they need to realize that now. We haven't built the safe car yet. I had a month after the tragedy, I had a hairdryer that was recalled. So when you think of those things, we need the sense of to proceed on. There's a sense of element, a sense of danger, and if it weren't for really the vision of Columbus and those people on Westward Ho, we wouldn't be standing right here. If they would have calculated and thought out, well, it won't work because, in fact, one of the things that really gave me strength when Dick Rutan and Gina Yeager came back from Voyager, they had shared a tribute with me that I read to all the audiences, and to have a dream and follow that dream and go for it. And because so many times I've done a lot of mountain climbing and so transatlantic, and people will say it's dangerous or why do you do it, and you just have to follow that dream and go for it. And it's for I want to make sure when I'm gone, I want to feel like I've left Earth a better place, that I just didn't journey through, that there was an imprint and I made a difference.
And obviously the dream now continues. Back to you, Bernie.
Thank you very much, John. And Bonnie Dunbar, what a difference 29 minutes can make. While we were listening to John's interview, Bonnie said it's good they got off because the bad stuff is closing in. You can see how gray it's gotten behind us. What a difference, 29 minutes, and it's almost dark here at the Cape.
Yes, we do have some weather moving in that probably would have affected the launch. I think it was a good time and everything worked well.
This is this formation that Valerie Voss had pointed out to us about 2 hours ago. It was off the coast, and she indicated, the radar indicated that it was moving closer, and my goodness, it's right on top of us. Well, they continue on their mission. The Discovery astronauts, the Discovery 5, Jeff Levine is off the reservation. You know, the Kennedy Space Center is a natural wildlife preserve. I even saw an eagle's nest, and there are many other forms of wildlife. But once you get off the Kennedy Space Center and go over to a small community called Titusville, you find that the roads to Titusville at this moment are still clogged, and people in Titusville proper are still talking about the fact that Discovery is up. Jeff?
Bernie, there was indeed some wildlife over here. The crowds were thrilled to see the launch go so perfectly. Among them, Mr. Dennis Bound from Sheffield, England. Dennis, the overseas perspective, your reaction?
Well, I should think it was great, you know, really marvelous.
What did you think when you saw it go up?
Well, I'm really excited, you know. It seemed incredible. There could be men in that thing, you know.
Why did you come to watch? What was the special reason?
It's an experience, isn't it? It's an experience. And after the tragedy 3 years ago, you know, anything could have happened today. you know.
You camped overnight. You brought
No, we've been here 2 days. We waited 2 days for the event. We thought it to be, you know, not much room, so we thought we'd come early, you know.
Was it worth it?
I think so, yeah. I think it was great.
Was this the first one you'd seen?
Yeah, yes. My friend's seen 3. He saw the tragedy and the one before and this one, but this is the first I've ever seen. And it was worth coming for.
Is there anything like it overseas, or is this unique to America?
No, I don't think so. The Russians have got something similar, I believe, but England's not bothered just yet.
But today seems to be our day. Dennis Brown,
it's your day,
thank you for
definitely,
joining us.
yeah.
Bernie, back to you.
Well, just as this is the first time for Dennis, so it is the first time for this reporter, and I'll never forget, literally, the earth shaking. CNN will continue its live coverage of Discovery. They are successfully off. They're heading for orbit. In about 6 hours, they deploy that satellite, the Tidris. We'll continue our coverage as we look at the liftoff here some 29-30 minutes ago. We'll be right back with more of the flight of Discovery.
Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
Crew confirms roll program. Houston now controlling.
We're go for main engine start. 7, 6, we have main engine start. 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
Crew confirms roll program.
Well, you know, Jackie Gleason loved Florida. He spent so many years down here, especially in the wintertime, and I can't help feeling, were he alive, he would have to say, because of what's happened with Discovery, how sweet it is. We want to maintain the overview of this mission, so let's go to Tony Clark in Houston at Mission Control. Tony?
Bernie, I was just thinking what you said, and also the interview John Zarella had with one of the former teacher in space finalists. She was saying at the time that Dick Scobie, the commander of the Shuttle Challenger, used to say, press on, and June Scobie, we talked to her a while back, and I asked her what she'd be thinking when the Discovery was launching, and she said she'd be thinking what Dick Scobie would be thinking if he were there. He would always say, go, baby, go. And I think that was the feeling we had here. I mean, there were people all around the Johnson Space Center who, as it was lifting off, were saying, go, baby, go. And the cheers that went up here and in Mission Control, it was an exciting thing. And just watching the opening, it's exciting to watch the launch again and again. Now we come down to the meaning of this, the 4-day mission that the shuttle crew is on. The crew has planned 4 days, a conservative mission, a mission aimed at not only launching the Tidris satellite and doing a dozen experiments, but it is also a mission aimed at checking the shuttle out as well. There have been scores of changes to the shuttle and the solid rocket boosters since the Challenger explosion 2.5 years ago. And though there have been repeated checks of the new designs, it is the launch itself which will be the ultimate shakedown test. The first few minutes are crucial.
We're not doing much, but we are concentrating on watching what's happening. Because if something does happen that shouldn't happen, we have to be ready to cope with that. I don't think there's anybody in our office that has ever flown on the space shuttle that didn't realize